Hey everyone, so picking up right where we left off in the previous video, we demonstrated how when adding a record for a new hire, you can also assign training based on that new hire's job description or job role. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're now going to go one step further and automatically assign a due date. Now, to have a due date, that means we now need to capture a start date or a hire date. So let's do that. So in our employee table, we have the employee name and employee job. So we're going to click on View. So on the Home tab, View, Design View, and we're just going to add EE just to keep the naming convention the same, and we'll call it Start Date. And this, instead of being text, will be a date field. Simple enough. Close that. It prompts us to save it because we made that change. And then in our EE training table, we're going to have to add a due date. So again, Home tab, View, Design View, and this will be due _ date, and this too will be date. Close that, save that. So since the training would be based on a certain time interval after the hire, then that means one of those fields will be calculated based on the other. So in the employee table, we have a start date. We're going to add, say, 14 days to it, and that calculated date will then be put into the due date. So let's go to our onboarding form. Again, Home, View, Design View, and what we're going to do is we're going to add a new field to capture that date. So we're just going to put this here, and then this will be, we'll go to Properties, and let's change, we're going to click on the All tab, and we're going to call this also Start Date. We'll save that. View, we're already in Design View. Go to Add Record. And then for Add Record, we're going to go to Event. And we have this event procedure that we created last time. This, using SQL, creates the new records. So we now want to save that new field. So this is the line that adds a row, adds a record to the table for employees. So that means here we're saying update employee name, update employee job. We're now going to add EE _ start _ date. And since we've added the field here, we now have to say what value is going to go there. Well, we also said, I believe we also chose start date for that. What did we just name it? Yes, start date. Now, to avoid confusion on your side, you might want to use different naming just to be clear what you're doing. This is start date in the table. This is start date from the form. And so we'll just test this functionality. So let's save this. And this will be Jill. And she's going to be a superhero. And she will start on August 1st, 2019. Add record. Append the row. No error messages. So let's go ahead and open up the employee table. And just like that, we're now capturing start date. Great, so we're halfway there. So now what we have to do is we now just have to calculate the date, whatever the interval we're going to use, say 14 days, and we have to calculate that value and put it into the corresponding due date. Now, in a more complex table, each training could technically have its own due date, but if you see how to do this for one, you can do it for multiple. Not to mention a lot of training tends to be categorized based on it's due once a year, due once a month, whatever, and therefore it would probably have the same due date when it's assigned. If it's all assigned at the same time, it'll probably have the same due date, but I just want to throw that out there. In a more complex database, it is indeed possible that you may have to have separate due dates. So it wouldn't just be due date, it'd be training 1 due date, training 2 due date, training 3 due date. If you want, I can do that in a later video, but again, this is an iterative process, baby steps. Okay, so we'll close that, and then we are going to close this, and I'll show you how we're going to calculate the date and update the training table. Now, before we continue, I just want to take a minute for my typical disclaimer, and that is I am not saying this is the only way to do this, and I'm not saying that this is the best way to do this. I'm simply saying this is a way to do this, and usually the way I demonstrate is usually fairly easily explainable. So it may not be the most efficient, and it may not be the least intensive for system resources, but it's easy to explain. And as always, this is an iterative process. So you make something that works, and then you can always iterate on it, and you can always make it more efficient. So with that out of the way, what we're going to do is we're going to use a query. So create, query design. You can either select the tables from here or from here. So the two tables we care about is the employee training table and the EE table. So what we're going to do is we're going to use what's known as an update query. So here, if you point at this update, you'll see make the query update the data in existing table. So to clarify what that means is it takes records that are pre-existing and will modify fields based on whatever criteria you give and update those fields to whatever value you provide. Not to be confused with an append, this actually adds a new record or records to your table. This does not add new records, it just modifies the pre-existing records. So what do we want? Well, first of all, we need to let the database know how these are related. So EE name is EE name. So all I did was drag and drop. I just grabbed that and put it there. Now, what are we going to update? The only thing that we're really going to update is the due date. We said the due date is going to be based on the start date. So what you're going to do is, let's click on update. Sorry, I pointed at it, but didn't actually click on it. See how it says update to? So right click, and we're going to do build. And we're just going to navigate through here. So HR, this is the database that we're working on. So you're going to drill down to that. We're going to drill down into a table. We are going to, from the employee table, take the start date, and then we're going to add 14 to it. So EE table, EE start date plus 14, okay. And that's about it. When this query runs, it will update based on employee name, the due date based on the start date. Now here's the problem. We can look at this either later on in this video or in the next video. Right now, this says take every single record and do this update, which technically isn't a problem. Since a person's start date doesn't change, then the due date doesn't change. But eventually what we're going to do is we're going to want to put in some criteria to make sure that old records aren't being updated. So you'd only want any new records to be updated. But again, this is an iterative process, and I just wanted to put that out there to explain why you're going to see what you're about to see. So let's save this query. It wants a name. So we'll call this assign _DD. So it's assigning a due date. And now what we do is we'll close that. And then let's see who we've got here. So EE table. So we have Jill Valentine for 8/1/2019. EE training, we have Jill Valentine, but no due date. Let's run the query. Typical advisory. And this is what I was talking about. That's why it's saying 16 rows, because it's looking at every single record. And then we click on yes. Now we come into EE training. And now Jill Valentine has a due date, 8/15. 8/1, 8/1 plus 14 is 8/15. It absolutely perfectly worked. Now, like I said, the only issue is that it's looking for every one of these and trying to update them. So what we're going to do is either at the end of this video or in another video, like I said, we can put in some criteria for when this would run and which parties are going to get updated. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new field to the EE training table whose sole purpose is to indicate whether or not a record should be updated. So let's go ahead, open EE training, go to View, Design View, and we're going to do two things. One, we add the new field, so update REC. So it's going to indicate whether or not a record should be updated, and it'll be short text. Technically, you could use the data type yes, no. We're just going to use short text. So we've added this new field. Now we have to set a default value. That way, going forward, the value will always update to indicate that when you've added a new record, it should be updated. So default value will be Y. And that should be in quotes. So we've added a new field, and the field will always have a default value of Y, and then we will run a query to modify it once the record's been updated. So let's close that. And so now we need to modify the query. So let's close the table. Design View. So let's take that new update record. The criteria is going to be that this new field has the value Y. So now this will only update if this is set to Y. And at the same time, we can update it to no. So what happens is it checks for the criteria of Y in the update record field, changes it to no, and changes that field to the calculation that we already made earlier. So we close that, we say yes, and that just about gets us to where we need to be. So we're going to create a new person here. So let's do clear. And we'll use 09/01/19 as the start date. So add record. Yes, yes. So now let's just make sure that worked right. So EE table. So there's Claire Redfield. And let's go to EE training. As you can see, that default value of Y showed up. And then we're going to run the query. Typical advisory. Notice how it says one row now. That tells us that more than likely it worked, because last time it said there were 16 updates. Now there's just one update. So we do yes. We go back to EE training, and there we go. So the due date is now 9/15, and it's saying do not update the record again. So let's run it one more time. You're going to update 0 rows. Absolutely perfect. So just like that, we're able to add a flag to indicate whether or not it should be updated. And the final step will be to integrate the query into the form, which is easy enough. We're just going to add a line of Visual Basic into the procedure that's already attached to this button, and that line of Visual Basic will say to run the query. So we're just going to make a note. The query is called assign_DD. So let's go ahead and click on the Add Record button. We go to our event procedure. And I'm just going to paste this in because I had typed it out before. The format similar, do command dot. In this case, it's open query, and then quotes in the name of the query. Save it, close it. Go to here, make sure the form is saved, and now we will just add And his training will be, and then add record. And now, if we go to EE table, there's the new employee, EE training, the new employee. This has been set to no, and a due date has been assigned. So that should do it for this lesson. So now you've added a due date, and we've now put a control in place to keep this from being updated over and over and over again. The only thing that you'd probably want to do is, depending on how large your database is when you're doing this, you'd probably have to do a data cleanup where you update these fields so as they don't get updated. But that's typical when you take a pre-existing database and you add new functionality. You're typically going to have to do something to make the pre-existing data be compatible. So that should just about do it. If you have any questions, just let me know. If there's anything else that you'd like added to this tutorial series, just let me know. And I hope this was helpful, and have a good night.